The combine harvester's engine died without warning, leaving John Mercer stranded in a sea of half-cut wheat under the merciless South Dakota sun. He swore and slammed his palm against the dashboard, but the machine remained dead, along with his watch, phone, and every other piece of technology on his 200-acre farm. Then he saw it, a perfect circle of flattened crops, easily the size of a football field, where his eastern wheat field had stood untouched just that morning. That's when the silence hit him. No birds, no distant traffic from the county road. Nothing but the whisper of wind through wheat and the hammering of his own heart. John climbed down from the cab, boots crunching on dry soil, and walked toward the circle with the same caution he'd once approached a wounded coyote. At its edge, the wheat hadn't been cut or broken. It had been pressed flat in a perfect spiral pattern, as if some invisible hand had gently but firmly pushed each stalk to the ground. He stepped into the circle, feeling the hairs on his arms rise. The air felt different here. Charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm, but with a strange undercurrent he couldn't name. In the exact center stood a single object, a metallic sphere no larger than a baseball, hovering 3 feet above the flattened wheat, spinning silently. "Hello, John Mercer," said a voice inside his head. "We've been watching your farm for several generations. It's time for your harvest to begin." Behind him, a shadow fell across the field, far too large to be a cloud. John whirled around, his weathered face tilting upward to a sight that shattered every certainty he'd built his life upon. A ship, if that's what you could call the massive structure that blotted out half the sky, hovered silently above his farm. It wasn't the flying saucer of cheap science fiction, but something organic and mechanical at once, like a living cathedral constructed of interlocking geometries that shouldn't have been possible. What? His voice failed him. 3 generations of Mercers had worked this land, had planted and harvested and survived drought and flood and economic collapse. None of that had prepared him for this moment. "We are the cultivators," the voice continued in his mind, calm and somehow ancient. "Your species is ready for integration." Ready for what? John found his voice, though it cracked like it hadn't since puberty. The floating sphere pulsed once with an inner light. "Your ancestors were planted here, John Mercer, just as you plant your wheat. We seeded this world with the potential for consciousness, and now we have returned to collect what has grown." The sphere rose higher, and John felt himself lifted with it, his boots leaving the ground as if gravity had suddenly become optional. "You have been selected as a representative specimen." Panic surged through him. "Put me down. I'm not going anywhere." But his protests were useless against whatever force held him. As he rose toward the impossible ship, he saw movement across his property, his nearest neighbor, Ellen Schaefer, driving her pickup down his access road, no doubt investigating the same power outage that had killed his combine. "Ellen," he shouted, though she was too far away to hear. "Run, get away." The sphere pulsed again. "Others will be gathered. The harvest is comprehensive." With terrifying smoothness, John passed through what appeared to be solid metal, entering the ship without resistance. Inside was not the sterile laboratory he'd half expected, but a vast space that defied comprehension. Corridors that bent in impossible angles, chambers that seemed both intimate and endless, and everywhere movement. Not all of it humanoid. He was deposited gently in a circular room with walls that seemed to breathe. The sphere hovered before him, its surface now rippling like liquid metal.
"I'm a farmer," John said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Not a specimen, not a representative, just a man who wants to go back to his fields." "That is precisely why you were chosen," the voice replied, though now it seemed to come from all around him rather than inside his mind. "You understand cultivation better than most of your kind.
the relationship between sower and crop, the necessity of harvesting. A section of the wall rippled and parted. Through it walked, or rather glided, a figure that John's mind initially refused to process. It had a body, certainly, but one that shifted subtly as it moved, with limbs that weren't quite arms and a head that wasn't quite a head. It was like watching smoke form itself into something almost, but not entirely human. "I am Vessel," the being said, its voice now audible rather than telepathic. "I will facilitate your understanding." "Understanding of what?" John asked, backing away until he hit the curved wall behind him. "Of your place in the great ecosystem," Vessel replied. "Your species has reached the critical threshold of technological development and ecological impact. You stand at a crossroads, self-destruction or transcendence." John laughed, a harsh sound born of terror and disbelief. "And you're here to push us one way or the other." "We are here to incorporate you." Vessel moved closer, and John noticed that where it passed, the floor seemed to respond, rippling slightly as if in recognition. "Your planet has produced many civilizations before yours. Some were harvested, others failed to thrive." The implications hit John like a physical blow. "There were others? Before humans?" "Many," Vessel confirmed. "The dinosaurs showed promise before their cultivation was interrupted by an astronomical event. Before them others, after your kind. Others still, perhaps. The cycle is long." The sphere pulsed again, and suddenly the walls of the chamber became transparent, or perhaps they weren't walls at all, but some kind of viewing screen. John gasped as he saw his farm from above, but the perspective quickly widened, showing the entire region, then the continent, then the planet itself glowing blue against the blackness of space. All across the surface, identical ships hung in the sky like massive, impossible fruits, heavy on a cosmic tree. "The harvest is simultaneous," Vessel explained. "Representatives from all human population centers are being gathered, as you were." John thought of Ellen, of his ex-wife in Minneapolis, of his daughter studying abroad in Tokyo. "Are you killing us?" Vessel made a movement that might have been the equivalent of shaking its head. "Death is a limited concept. We are elevating you beyond your current form. Your consciousness will continue, integrated into the greater network of cultivated intelligences." "That sounds an awful lot like death to me," John said, surprising himself with his steady tone. Years of facing down drought, debt, and disease had given him a certain resilience. "I don't want to be elevated or integrated. I want to finish harvesting my wheat." Vessel seemed to consider this. "Your attachment to your current existence is expected. It will fade with integration." "Like hell it will," John muttered. Then louder, "Why me? There are scientists, leaders, people who might actually understand what you're talking about. I'm just a farmer." "Precisely," Vessel repeated. "Scientists observe, leaders command. But farmers participate in the fundamental cycle of life, death and renewal. You understand, on a visceral level, what we do on a cosmic one." It glided closer. "And you, John Mercer, have something else that makes you ideal." "What's that?" "You speak to your crops," Vessel said. "When you think no one is listening, you thank the land for its bounty. You apologize when you must use harsh methods to protect your yield. You understand the sacred relationship between cultivator and cultivated." John felt his face flush. It was true, a private habit he'd developed after inheriting the farm from his father, who'd been a taciturn, practical man who would have scoffed at such sentimentality. "That's just talking to myself." "Is it?" Vessel's form shimmered. "Or is it recognition of a deeper truth? The consciousness in all things?" The sphere suddenly expanded, growing until it was the size of a beach ball. its surface now clearly liquid, rippling with complex patterns that somehow reminded John of crop circles. "Place your hands upon the interface," Vessel instructed. "Experience what awaits your kind." John hesitated. "And if I refuse?" "You were not chosen for your compliance, John Mercer. You were chosen for your understanding. Touch the interface." Something in the tone, not threatening but implacable, like the approach of winter or the inevitability of harvest, made John reach out. His calloused fingers touched the liquid metal surface. The universe exploded behind his eyes. He was everywhere and nowhere. He was the wheat in his fields and the soil that nourished it. He was the clouds that brought rain and the sun that coaxed growth. He was the combines harvesting crops in Argentina and the rice paddies of China being planted by hand. He was a prehistoric hunter searching for game and a futuristic being of pure energy contemplating the birth of stars. He was connected to countless consciousnesses, human and otherwise, spread across what felt like the entire cosmos. Some were clearly alien, their thoughts structured so differently that they were barely comprehensible. Others were startlingly familiar, variations on humanity that had evolved on distant worlds. And through it all ran the cultivators, tending the garden of conscious life as it spread across the universe. When John came back to himself, he was on his knees, tears streaming down his face. Vessel stood watching him, its form somehow clearer now, as if John's perception had been enhanced. "That's what you want to turn us into?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "It is what you already are," Vessel replied, "but limited, isolated, unaware of your connection to the greater consciousness. We merely remove the barriers." John struggled to his feet. The experience had left him shaken, but also strangely resolute. "You didn't answer my question before. Are you killing us? Will human beings still exist on Earth after your harvest?" The cell was silent for a moment. "Not as you are now. The physical forms of the chosen representatives will be absorbed. The rest will be reset." "Reset?" John felt cold dread settling in his stomach. "What does that mean?" "Your civilization will be removed. The knowledge and advancement of your species will be preserved in the consciousness of the representatives. Earth will be prepared for the next cycle of cultivation. You're going to wipe out humanity," John said flatly. "Billions of people gone. The pattern has repeated countless times across countless worlds," Vessel said, its tone neither apologetic nor proud. "It is the way of cultivation." John thought of his daughter, 22 and brilliant, studying robotics with dreams of building machines that could help with the world's food shortages. He thought of Ellen's kids, who sometimes helped out during harvest season, their laughter carrying across the fields. He thought of the small town nearby, where everyone knew everyone else, where the diner served the best apple pie in 3 counties. All of it gone. "Reset." "No," he said quietly, then louder. "No, I don't accept that." Vessel tilted its not-quite head. "Acceptance is not required. It is simply what will occur." "You said I was chosen because I understand cultivation," John pressed. "Well, I do, and no good farmer destroys healthy crops. No good farmer wipes out an entire field because a few plants have reached maturity." "Your analogy is flawed," Vessel replied. "Your civilization is not healthy. You poison your environment. You war amongst yourselves. You are on the brink of creating intelligences that could compete with your own." "We're learning," John argued. "We're growing. That's what living things do. And when growth reaches its peak, harvest follows," Vessel countered. "It is the natural order." John shook his head. "Not always. Sometimes the farmer saves the best of the crop for replanting. Sometimes growth leads to new growth, not to an end. He took a step toward Vessel, emboldened by desperation. If you're such advanced cultivators, why can't you see that we're not ready for harvest? We're still developing, still becoming whatever it is we might be. The sphere between them pulsed, and John had the distinct impression that some kind of communication was passing between it and Vessel, communication he wasn't privy to. Finally, Vessel spoke again. Your argument is not without precedent. There have been instances where promising cultivations were granted extensions. Hope flickered in John's chest. Extensions? Additional time to develop naturally, without intervention. It is rarely granted. But it could be, John pressed. You could let us continue growing, learning. You could come back when we've actually reached whatever potential you think we have. Vessel was silent again, its form rippling more actively now, as if agitated. The sphere contracted and expanded rhythmically. There is disagreement among the cultivator consensus, Vessel finally said. Your response was unanticipated. Most representatives plead only for their own survival, not for their entire species. John thought about this. Maybe that's your answer right there. Maybe that means we're different from what you expected. Worth studying longer. Not harvesting yet. The chamber around them suddenly shifted, the walls becoming opaque again before reshaping themselves into a different configuration. A new opening appeared, and through it floated several more beings, similar to Vessel but distinctly different in their patterns of movement and coloration. The consensus has arrived, Vessel announced. They will evaluate your petition. What followed was the strangest conversation of John's life, if conversation was even the right word for it. The cultivators communicated with each other in ways he couldn't perceive, while occasionally addressing questions to him that probed at the very foundations of human existence. What did he consider the purpose of consciousness? How did he justify humanity's impact on Earth's ecosystems? What value did he place on individual existence versus collective advancement? Why should the cultivators delay a harvest they had planned for millennia? John answered as honestly as he could, drawing on everything from his practical farming experience to half-remembered philosophy classes from his 1 year at community college, to conversations with his deeply religious mother and his atheist ex-wife. He spoke about human potential and human failings, about the beauty of individual lives and the possibility of collective wisdom. We're not ready, he concluded, exhausted. We're still figuring out how to live with each other, with our planet, with the technologies we create. If you harvest us now, you're taking an unripe crop. The cultivators withdrew to confer, leaving John alone with Vessel. Do they ever change their minds? John asked. Or is this all just, I don't know, a formality before you do what you planned anyway? The consensus values adaptation. Vessel replied, it is rare for a harvest to be delayed, but not unprecedented. And if they do delay it, what happens to me? To the other representatives you've taken? That has not yet been determined, Vessel admitted. The protocol for harvest delay is seldom implemented. John laughed despite himself. Great, so I might have saved humanity, but doomed myself to be some kind of alien zoo exhibit. Your concern for your personal fate is natural, Vessel said, but somewhat contradictory to your argument for the value of collective humanity. I never claimed humans aren't contradictory, John replied. That's part of what makes us what we are. The chamber reshaped itself again, and the consensus returned. One of them, distinguished by patterns that seemed somehow more complex than the others, addressed John directly. John Mercer, representative of humanity, the consensus have evaluated your petition and the current state of human development. Its voice was similar to Vessel's, but carried a weight of authority that made the air itself seem to vibrate. We have determined that an extension may be warranted. John's knees nearly buckled with relief. Thank you. That's thank you. However, the cultivator continued, such an extension comes with conditions. Humanity must demonstrate progress in key areas: ecological stewardship, peaceful cooperation, ethical technological development. You will be monitored. For how long? John asked. 100 of your years, the cultivator replied. A moment in cosmic terms, but sufficient to demonstrate meaningful development or lack thereof. And what happens to me? To the other representatives? The cultivator's form shimmered. You will be returned, bearing knowledge of what transpired here. You will serve as witnesses, carrying the truth of the cultivators and the coming evaluation. You want us to warn people? John frowned. No one will believe us. Some will, the cultivator said. Some must. The choices made by your species in the coming century will determine whether the next visit brings harvest or further cultivation. The representatives must guide humanity toward understanding this reality. John thought about this. Being returned was better than he'd hoped for, but the responsibility they were placing on him and the other representatives was enormous. How could a South Dakota wheat farmer convince the world that alien gardeners were giving humanity a century-long probation? I'll do my best, he finally said, but I'm just one man. Not even an important one by most standards. Importance is relative. Vessel interjected. The smallest seed can yield the greatest crop if planted in fertile soil. Poetic, John muttered, but not very practical. You will not be alone, the lead cultivator assured him. The other representatives come from all walks of human life. Together, you will form a network of witnesses. Your collective voice will be stronger than any individual could be. John thought of his daughter again, of the world she might inherit, either 100 years of striving toward some cosmic standard of civilization, or obliteration when the cultivators returned to find humanity wanting. All right, he said, send me back. Let me be your witness, or whatever you want to call it. But don't expect miracles. We expect only that you carry the truth, the cultivator replied. What humanity does with that truth will determine your fate. The sphere expanded once more, engulfing John completely in its liquid metal embrace. The last thing he heard before consciousness fled was Vessel's voice. Until the next harvest season, John Mercer, may your fields be fertile and your yield abundant. John awoke in his wheat field, exactly where he had been standing when the sphere first appeared. The circle of flattened crops remained, but the massive ship was gone. His watch was working again, showing that less than an hour had passed. In the distance, Ellen's pickup was just turning onto his access road. Everything looked normal. Ordinary, except for the perfect crop circle surrounding him and the weight of cosmic knowledge pressing down on his shoulders. He took out his phone, surprised to find it functioning again. There were a dozen notifications, news alerts about mysterious power outages around the world, about strange phenomena in the skies over major cities, about crop circles appearing simultaneously on every continent. The other representatives were back too, then, all carrying the same impossible message that humanity was being watched, evaluated, given one last chance to prove itself worthy of continued existence. John took a deep breath of familiar air, the scent of wheat and soil and life grounding him in the reality of his farm, his world. Then he started walking toward Ellen's approaching truck, rehearsing in his mind how he would begin to explain what had happened, what was still happening, and the century of work that now stretched before humanity. Behind him, in the center of the crop circle, a single stalk of wheat had remained standing upright, As John walked away, it began to glow with a subtle inner light, its roots reaching deeper into the soil of Earth than any plant had grown before, connecting to others of its kind around the globe, a network of witnesses to humanity's final growing season. The harvest would come. The only question was whether humanity would be ready when it did.